Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our first school law webinar of 2023. My name is Kaitlin Atlas, and above me on my screen, but perhaps in a different spot on your screen, is Amy Dickerson.
Hello.
And we are pleased to join you today for a focused discussion on the top 5 things that complaint managers and non-discrimination coordinators should be keeping in mind for 2023. We have heard a lot from the Office for Civil Rights lately, and we'll update you today regarding Title IX, Section 504, and Title VI generally, just so you have an overview of the legal updates and what you should know. And then we'll end our time together today with our top 5 key tips for responding to complaints of discrimination and harassment and best practices for serving as a non-discrimination coordinator in your district. Before we begin today, just some housekeeping items. I do want to remind everybody that we are live on Zoom today, so feel free to use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. Amy and I will keep an eye on those throughout, and we'll also try to save a couple minutes at the end here to make sure we have time to address your questions. I also wanted to share, we do record our webinars, so please feel free to share with your colleagues. They'll be posted on our website within a few days of this, and we also record them as podcasts should you need some light listening on your drive to work. So without further ado, let's talk about why we chose this topic to be our first topic of 2023. The United States Department of Education recently released data regarding Office of Civil Rights complaints over the 2022 fiscal year. The data indicated they received 18,804 complaints, and that's the highest number of complaints in the agency's history. So we figured today is a really good time to start today, and the month of January, starting a new year, a good time to talk about some reminders for you as non-discrimination coordinators and complaint managers, with the hopes that you can prevent some of those complaints from going to the Office for Civil Rights, and that we're seeing a decrease in those numbers in the future. So again, we're going to start today by providing some just general updates on big topical areas, Title IX, Title VI, and Section 504, and then we'll go into kind of some of the nitty-gritty best practice tips. So for Title IX, the Office for Civil Rights continues to issue guidance on the scope of Title IX and what it will investigate under Title IX. We've seen a lot of guidance on this issue over the past, I would say, two and a half years since those August 2020 Title IX regulations took effect. So by way of background, as a reminder, you will recall that in May of 2020, the Department of Education published its long-awaited Title IX new regulations. Those took effect in August of 2020. I'm sure I don't need to remind anybody on this webinar that we were dealing with some other things in August of 2020, like how are we going to open schools in the middle of a global pandemic? But nevertheless, we all did it and we got through it. And the August 2020 Title IX regulations have been in effect for about 2.5 years now. Since those took effect, we've seen these additional guidances and notices of interpretation from the Department of Education. The first one we wanted to remind everybody of was the one that was issued in June of 2021, in which OCR indicated that it would investigate claims of discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity under Title IX. So there was some ambiguity as to whether Title IX sex discrimination applied to claims of sexual orientation and gender identity. There was a Supreme Court case called the Bostock case, which the Department of Education, OCR, subsequently said, we read this case to say Title IX does apply to claims of discrimination and harassment based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So we wanted to remind everybody here today to make sure that all of your building staff are aware of Title IX's applicability to discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So we need to be taking a somewhat wider lens in how we look at Title IX. It is not just sex in terms of biological gender, it's broader than that. We also wanted to remind everybody to be aware of what I call kind of the red flag words that would signal a complaint on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. So that's when we hear words like discrimination, harassment, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, gender-related expression. Words like that should be red flags to your team to send this up to you as the non-discrimination coordinator, the Title IX coordinator, whatever it is your role is, so that you can screen those complaints and determine whether they do apply, whether Title IX does indeed apply. The second Title IX document we wanted to remind everybody of was from October of 2022, so relatively recent. It was a guidance document called Discrimination Based on Pregnancy and Pregnancy-Related Conditions. And this document reminded schools that Title IX covers discrimination against both students and employees based on pregnancy and pregnancy-related conditions, including discrimination based on abortion. So again, this tells us we need to look at Title IX with a wider lens than I think sometimes we were before, in that Title IX it does apply to pregnancy, pregnancy-related conditions, and abortion. So keeping all of those in mind, and again, having those red flag words of if a student or an employee comes to you and says, I'm being discriminated because I had an abortion, that should trigger our Title IX red flags to go up so we can do an analysis as to whether it falls under Title IX. And then you're gonna say, when I say this, well, why did you even tell me about the other two? And I will answer that question. But our third pending change to be aware of is, as all of you know, with the change in administration, there was a push to revise the Title IX regulations from August of 2020. Obviously, that takes a long time. They received, Amy might be able to tell me an exact number, but thousands upon thousands of comments on the proposed rules. And the Department of Education has told us that they believe they will issue the new Title IX rules in May, this spring. So for now, we have to continue implementing those August 2020 rules. And that's why what we just talked about before in terms of gender identity and sexual orientation and pregnancy-related conditions are still very important to be aware of. Continue moving forward like you have, continue training your staff, but also you as Title IX coordinators, non-discrimination coordinators, and complaint managers should have on your radar that these changes are coming, and make sure you're following our alerts and kind of the general alerts in the field so that you're aware of when they come out and you know what those changes are.
That's right. And, you know, while our current best information that we have is May, I recall quite well when we were awaiting the 2020 regulations to be released, that date kept getting pushed back as well under the prior administration. So we will see if that occurs now, but we're certainly staying on top of that, and we'll share out any information once we get it with you. So with that, I will then talk a little bit about some news that we received from the OCR regarding Title VI. And really, this was just a fact sheet that the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights issued earlier this month on Title VI discrimination and harassment. It's a 2-page fact sheet, and it really just serves as a great reminder on the standard under Title VI and the importance, I think, of training staff to notify you as the complaint managers and non-discrimination coordinators whenever there is a report or complaint of harassing or discriminatory conduct towards students, for you to be able to assess the best way to proceed. So in terms of the fact sheet that was issued, it really clarifies that Title VI prohibition on race, color, or national origin discrimination extends to students who experience discrimination, including harassment, based on their actual or perceived shared ancestry or ethnic characteristics, or on citizenship or residency in a country with a dominant religion or distinct religious identity. It also clarifies that Title VI prohibits discrimination based on race, color, or national origin against students of any religion, such as students who are Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, when that discrimination involves such actions as racial, ethnic, or ancestral slurs or stereotypes, how a student looks, including skin color, physical features, or style of dress that may reflect both ethnic and or religious traditions. It may include complaints or reports regarding someone's accent or name, including names commonly associated with particular shared ancestry or ethnic characteristics, or discrimination or harassing comments based on the language that is spoken. The fact sheet does provide additional examples of fact patterns that could raise Title VI concerns and include links to additional resources on OCR's website. So it's something to really keep in mind to make sure that these are issues that your office and that your staff are aware of, and making sure that when there are any reports of conduct that could involve any of these fact patterns, that those get reported to you. OCR does note in their fact sheet that Title VI does not provide protections solely for religious discrimination, such as a school's denial of a student's request to miss a class for a religious holiday, but that the Department of Justice would have jurisdiction on that issue. So I think that really just underscores the importance, again, of training staff to notify you whenever there is a report of any discrimination or harassing conduct of any kind, and then for you to work with legal counsel to ensure the appropriate policies and procedures are followed to process and address that complaint. And of course, our firm can offer support on training for both staff and administrators in this area. So do please feel free to reach out if that's of interest, or if you have any additional questions on that. And when we share out the recording of today's webinar, we'll be happy to also provide a link to the fact sheet that I just referenced.
Yes, and I also just popped the link to the fact sheet in the chat, just in case anyone's dying to look at it right this very second, but we can, when we send it out, we'll also have those there.
Great.
So our next general area of updates is on Section 504. Earlier during our webinar today, I referenced the Office for Civil Rights data on its complaints over the 2022 fiscal year. They specifically broke down that data, and it found that they received 6,390 complaints related specifically to disability discrimination. And that's the largest number of disability discrimination complaints since 2017. So as complaint managers, we wanted to make sure that you all were aware of disability discrimination complaints, that those are a hot topic that families are going to OCR about, and to make sure you are aware of your internal district policies and procedures concerning such complaints. Sometimes in my personal practice, I find that the complaint managers don't always know what's going on in the special ed department, and the special ed department doesn't always know what's going on with the complaint managers' relative departments. So there's a value in communication, especially at your administrative cabinet meetings, to make sure everybody is in the loop when there are claims of disability discrimination, or you hear kind of, again, those red flag words that continue to come up, making sure you are communicating with each other so you know fully what's going on, what the district's 504 procedures are, and that we are responding to those complaints appropriately. The other piece I wanted to mention is that you may recall late last spring, the Department of Education said, we're starting the process of revising the Section 504 regulations, and we want some general feedback. They received quite a bit of general feedback. I don't have the exact number, but they recently released information saying they're going to issue a notice of proposed rulemaking with proposed Section 504 rules based on that feedback this spring. So what that means is they will release their proposals. There will be an opportunity for public comment. So if you have any feedback on those proposals, you can submit it to the Department of Education. And then in due time, once they have reviewed that feedback, made their revisions to the proposed rules, we will have new Section 504 rules. Again, very important. Right now, we are maintaining the status quo. The current 504 rules apply. Your current 504 policies and procedures apply in your district. But this is something to have kind of on your radar so that when they do come out, you're prepared to provide additional training to your staff, revise and update your policies and procedures, etc. We have received some questions about what will be in those new Section 504 rules. the true answer is we don't know until we see them, right? We can't predict the future, although that would be great if Amy and I had a magic 8-ball. But we think, based on some of the what we've seen out of the Department of Education over the past few years, we think there'll be an increased focus on student mental health, especially post-pandemic. There seems to be there was a mental health crisis before. Post-pandemic, it seems to be even more at a crisis level. So we do anticipate some specific language in those regulations about how to address students in mental health crisis. And kind of in hand with that, probably I anticipate, though I could be wrong, more language on disciplinary procedures for students who are Section 504 eligible.
I think that's right. And I think when the Department of Ed issued their notice to invite comments to help inform what the proposed regs would look like, they really signaled that a lot of those areas would be their intended focus of the proposed regs. And if you're interested, we did put out an alert earlier in the year when they made that announcement that sort of signaled to some of those areas that they were identifying that might give further insight. So with that, I think we'll turn then to kind of what we wanted to close with today, which is to provide you sort of our top 5 things that we, in addition to these substantive areas that we just went through, some top 5 tips and best practices that we want complaint managers and non-discrimination coordinators to be especially mindful of this year, recognizing the fact that, as Kaitlin discussed earlier, there are a lot of complaints that are being filed at OCR, and we know that OCR is, working and processing these complaints, and our districts are hearing from OCR regarding these complaints that that OCR is opening an investigation for. Oftentimes, your offices, the offices of those who are in charge with responding to these complaints, including our non-discrimination coordinators and complaint managers, oftentimes your office is the first stop when the district does get an OCR complaint, as your office is typically the one that is going to be managing, overseeing the complaints or reports if they were to have come through your office before a complaint is filed with OCR. So with that in mind, here are sort of our top 5 things we want you to be especially mindful of. And the first is really to know your internal policies and procedures well, or at minimum, know where to find them and go back and review them often. You do want to review board policies regularly so that you can better assess what policies should be used to investigate complaints when they come in. As you know, in any given week, month, or semester, you may receive a report or complaint that raises issues involving bullying among students, or hostile environment harassment among staff, or a complaint of harassment of a sexual nature among students, or a complaint involving athletics that could raise concerns regarding hazing, or a complaint from a parent on a curriculum or accommodation issue, or many other types of issues that may be raised in a complaint. Just within those examples that I gave, each of these reports could implicate a different board policy or internal procedure that you have, or a procedure that you have included in a student handbook that you've told parents that you're going to follow when a report like that comes in. Or there may be multiple board policies or procedures that may apply depending upon the issues that are raised, and that those policies or procedures would govern the steps that you must take when responding to that particular report or complaint. So that's why it is really important that the first step to take when receiving notice of any report or complaint should be to ask, do we have a board policy and administrative procedure that may apply here, or multiple policies or procedures? And then if so, what are those? And what do they require me to do next and when responding to this report or complaint? And of course, legal counsel can be very helpful when ensuring that all appropriate policies are being considered and help you to issue spot these. But that is definitely a first step that we want to have a habit of taking when getting any report or complaint. Kaitlin, do you want to share our next tip?
I do. And I think it really dovetails nicely from Amy's tip. not only do you need to know your internal policies and procedures as the complaint managers, because you're tasked with implementing those, but it's really important to provide training to district staff on those policies and procedures. Unfortunately, what I see often in my practice is people really trying to do the right thing. So that's not unfortunate, right? But sometimes a teacher will receive a complaint or will receive multiple complaints, sometimes via email, saying my child's being discriminated against, my child's being bullied, my child's being harassed, and they try to handle those on their own in good faith, trying their best. But then we're not investigating them pursuant to our policy. And then we end up in a case with, with OCR, with the parents saying, well, we did something, but we didn't really follow our policy. And many of you are probably aware that OCR is very, very focused on procedure and following the way your policies are written. They all obviously outcome is important, but really it's how you got to that outcome that they're going to go through with a fine-tooth comb. So all of that to say is make sure your staff are aware of your policies and procedures, are aware of when they should be coming to you to say, hey, I got this complaint. What should I be doing about it? Because there may be times where you say, you go ahead and do this. And there may be times where you say, teacher, principal, etc., you hit pause, I'm taking it over from here.
Yep.
Remember the buzzwords and make sure your staff are aware of the buzzwords. So discrimination, harassment, the protected classes, making sure everybody has those kind of on their radar. And also making sure, we just touched on this earlier, but that there's communication between departments so that there is an awareness of what is going on kind of more globally.
And I'd say additionally, the benefit of making sure that you're training your staff on when to report something to your office can be also to underscore that even if a parent doesn't use the words discrimination or harassment, but a parent or student reports conduct that otherwise, if true, would be considered discrimination or harassment, we want our staff to be supported and trained to identify those fact patterns enough to issue spot and recognize that it might be something to bring to your attention. So with that, another key thing we want to keep in mind is something we really already talked about today, which is to just be aware of the current requirements under our different laws and the upcoming changes that may be coming. So we've talked about Title IX regulations coming in the spring or anticipated soon in the spring, as well as the fact that we anticipate proposed Section 504 regulations being issued. As Kaitlin discussed, while any proposed 504 regulations would be just proposed, even once those are released, and wouldn't require any immediate action, both of these actions by the Department of Ed may require eventual changes to policies, procedures, and training for staff, with the Title IX regulations requiring that sooner than later as we anticipate. But for now, again, as Kaitlin said, it's important to have a strong handle on your current policies and procedures in these areas as the current regulations are still in effect, but to then stay informed on any needed changes once new final regulations under Title IX and Section 504 are released. As always, we will provide updates as those changes occur. If you do not currently regularly get updates from our firm on these on our regular alerts and blog posts, please contact us to sign up for those so that you will receive those whenever we push anything out.
Our next tip is, when in doubt, contact us or your legal counsel and investigate. It's generally, you're going to be in a better place if you've investigated, even if you say, I don't think there's anything here. This seems totally bogus. What is going to help you as a district is documentation that you have conducted a thorough investigation. And so that if anyone comes to question you on it, you can say, no, we thought this was bogus and it was bogus. And this is what we did to determine that. We interviewed 5 staff members. We reviewed documentation. We reviewed video footage, whatever the case may be. You're going to be in a better place if you have done that investigation, rather than if you didn't do the investigation and you're saying, well, we didn't really think it was serious at the time. Similarly, contacting your legal counsel, we are always happy to talk through these situations with you and determine the best course of action. We know that as complaint managers, frequently your title is not just complaint manager, it's complaint manager plus assistant superintendent plus coordinator for 5 different things. So we don't want to put you in a position where you're conducting 15 investigations on any given day. But we can talk to you about what that investigation looks like and what board policy to investigate under to best protect the district.
And our 5th tip is one that I share, recognizing that just as Kaitlin commented on, you have a lot on your plate in terms of managing, the various duties that we know our complaint managers and non-discrimination coordinators have. But our final tip really is to make sure that we're documenting the steps that you're taking when responding to any report or complaint that comes in. And for those of you who have received our trainings on best practices for conducting investigations, that final tip will come as no surprise to you, because it's something that we do really like to emphasize the importance of, and we think it's really more important than ever in light of some of the things we've talked about today. So having a good system and a good organized system to keep track of all your reports and complaints and the relevant documentation for each is really important to establish. And if you've got a good procedure that you have already in place, then hopefully that will just come naturally and be just part of your regular practice when responding to a report or complaint that comes in. So maintain good documentation of any reports or complaints that are made, of all correspondence that is occurring in response to that report or complaint. So any internal correspondence, as well as correspondence with the complaining party and responding party regarding those reports. Keep good, thorough notes of all interviews and meetings. So this may involve an extra step as well, to save any emails in the appropriate files, to type up notes following any meetings. But again, having this practice really can help ensure that your investigation and responses are sufficient. It allows you the opportunity to review your file before closing out an investigation to make sure that you feel everything is sufficiently covered. And it can really help demonstrate that the case is something that was responded to thoroughly. Should the district's response to a report or complaint ever be reviewed or challenged, then you've got that good documentation to show the response that you took. As many of you know, again, our office does offer training on best practices for investigation, where we can provide additional support in this area as well.
And I'll just reiterate, I think Amy's comment about documentation is probably the most important takeaway. So that's why we saved it to be the last tip, the one that is on your mind as you walk away today. We appreciate all of you joining us today. It's great to see everybody again in 2023. Please do feel free to contact us with any questions. As I said, we will be sharing the materials from today's presentation on our website after the Zoom recording processes, which, as you all know, sometimes takes a little bit of time, but hopefully within the next few days. And we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar soon.
Thank you.